Welcome to the Wealth Stream Podcast. The team at Hightower Great Lakes share their insights and passions for empowering their clients to live their best life. In this energetic podcast, we will take you on a journey to help you navigate your financial future, overcome life's challenges to reach your financial goals, and find the financial clarity you've been searching for. Let's explore the downstream impact of your wealth and what it means to you, your family, and your community to live greater.
Hello and welcome to the Wealth Stream with Tim Scannell from Hightower Great Lakes. Today we're going to be talking about wealth protection strategies. And Tim, this is something that everybody wants to protect, is their wealth. I would assume, at least. Nobody's out there just burning it, I suppose.
Exactly.
That's one way to protect it, not set it on fire.
That's right. Put it in a cave somewhere, right?
Yes, absolutely. So that's number one on your list, I'm sure.
Right.
So where do we start today with wealth protection strategies?
Well, as we talked about in the past, when we work with our clients, we're focused on 5 primary areas. Wealth preservation, which is rate of return. It's kind of the foundation of everything that we do and all advisors do. But we also focus on wealth enhancement, which addresses minimizing taxes, focusing on cash flow, wealth transfer, making sure that at some point, during their life or when they pass, that the assets transfer properly to their heirs. And we also focus on charitable giving in a way that we try to make sure that their gifts they're making are meaningful and maybe more impactful. But today we wanted to focus on the 5th area, which is wealth protection. And when we talk about wealth protection with clients, we're really trying to make sure that their assets are protected from what we call unjustly taken. These are all legal processes, so it's nothing gray. It's really just making sure that as we work with our clients, with our CPAs, CFPs, certified team, and as we work with their professionals, their attorneys, their trust officers, things like that, we're just making sure that their wealth is protected. And today, specifically, we wanted to talk about asset protection strategies and, are there ways to protect or shield clients' wealth? So that's really what we wanted to go over today.
All right. So where do we start with that? I mean, there's always a beginning.
Yeah. So what I want to convey today is there's really 3 takeaways that I'll go through and, just tell you about them in advance. So number one is that when we're doing asset protection, what we're really trying to do is stop lawsuits from happening in the first place, and making it hard for, creditors or other people who might want to go after your assets to do it. And these are things you need to do in advance. The second area of the takeaway is really that everything that clients do and that we do with them needs to be very transparent. And I mention that because you can listen to the radio or look on the internet, and there's a lot of people talking about, hiding your assets or effectively, doing things that people can't see. But the reality is that the proper asset protection processes focus on transparency to make sure that, people can see what you're doing and not necessarily hiding it. And then also the third takeaway really is that it's a multi-pronged approach. There's a lot of things you're going to end up doing. There's not one solution. And you really need to have it coordinated with all of your advisors to make it effective.
Okay, so are we going to hit all 3 of those areas today?
We are.
Okay.
So the first thing I thought was, just to kind of restate what we think is the obvious, but maybe some clients don't, is just talk about what the problem is. And we're in a litigious society. There's lots of opportunities for people to go after. If you're a high-income professional, if you're an entrepreneur, there's a lot of areas where you've got liability and risk. It used to be, I think, when maybe 15, 20 years ago, we would work with physicians, and they were, obviously high risk because things can go wrong and they have medical malpractice. But I find that with all the entrepreneurs and business owners I work for, really there's a lot more of this type of litigation is happening to them that maybe they didn't see in the past. So it's a litigious society. People are using it as a tool. And if you have substantial net worth, if you're a high-income professional, you need to do it. And, one thing when I talk to clients, they'll say, they'll complain about attorneys or they'll complain about the legal profession. But I love working with attorneys and I love the profession. And really, they're the ones who are keeping us from the business world being the Wild West, where, I don't know, I'm not saying going back to the old and shoot them out, but I think that if we all have good attorneys and good professionals, it does make the world safer. And so I'm a pro attorney, I guess is what I want to say, because I know a lot of times I talk to clients or other advisors where they just complain about their attorneys.
Yeah, and I think it's true in any profession. You've got great attorneys, and then you've got some shady attorneys. I mean, and that's all there is to it. And there's attorneys that will be out there that will just be in it for their own gain, their own money, and they're happy to bring a lawsuit against anybody if they think that they can get money out of the client that's going to pay them to do so. And that's just shady. But you've got a ton of attorneys out there that are doing the right thing and just really trying to protect people. And that's who we want to work with.
Exactly. And the other problem, not only is this, there's a lot of litigation going on, but as you can imagine, and we see it, and you probably see it too, but there's a lot of inaction on behalf of the clients, right? So when we first meet with a prospect or we're talking to a client, we'll just say, what have you done to reduce the risk of losing your wealth? And oftentimes, there's just a deer in the headlights, or, well, I have a will, I have a trust. But there's just so much more involved with that. And it's not even necessarily the client itself, but if they're an entrepreneur business owner, it's their employees that can do things that can impact them, or it's their family, their kids, their grandkids, things like that.
Yeah, very true.
And in our experience, there's just far too many people who don't address it. So we just make sure that this is, on the agenda and on the checklist and on the planning processes that we do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just think it's just not going to happen to me. I mean, that's not it's not something I really have to worry about. That's for so and so over there because they've got this type of business or they've got that type of family, right? I mean, I could see them getting sued, but they just don't think it's not something I have to be concerned about. But that's just not accurate,
right? And I'd like to look at it when we look at the solutions or talk about strategies. They really are strategies, and the analogy I like to use is, when you're watching or playing football or you're watching any sporting event, there's obviously rules out there. So once you know what the rules are, it's just much easier for you to implement strategies to work within the rules, but protect your wealth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's part of the number one point I always bring up with clients is that there's no formal body of law or which says, hey, asset protection rules. It's really all about strategy and tools, and it falls under what you would call the broader umbrella of risk management. Risk management, there's legal planning, but this also gets into, making sure that when you assemble your team of professionals, you have a really qualified property and casualty agent, somebody who can really also talk about risk mitigation or passing some of this risk on to the bigger, larger insurance companies that do this for a living.
Yeah.
And then as we get into, what specific strategies, there's really two primary, I would say, focuses or goals or outcomes that we like to, address when we're doing these planning. And number one is, when we set up strategies, we're looking to discourage or deter a possible lawsuit before it ever really begins. So if possible, you don't want to be in a situation where all of a sudden you're being sued, or you're getting divorced, or one of your children is getting divorced. Then you have to start addressing, where are these assets going? How am I protecting my business? But so in advance, that's the number one thing that we talk to people about is doing things to discourage lawsuits from ever even showing up. So for example, I'm working right now with a case where a client of mine is selling a home and buying another home, and it's a short sale. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a home that was built. The builder and the owner had some litigation, disputes about it. They couldn't sell it. There's a number of liens against it. Now the bank is ready to foreclose on this house, and my client went in there to buy it, basically from the bank. But what's happened is, just as an example of deterrence from lawsuits, the bank is now really they're holding some of the liens. They're making it difficult for my client to purchase. And my client is mad, obviously, because they went into this deal hoping to get a new house. But the reality is these banks are so big and so powerful that in and of itself is a deterrent, from trying to file a suit against them, because they have more money than, you ever will, and they have a full-time professional legal team. And so it's just hard to beat them. And so in effect, just the nature of them is that they're a deterrent.
Yeah, and that's frustrating.
It is. I mean, it was a dream house, and it may still happen, but the issue is they also walked into the transaction, and they really, I think the representation they had or the attorneys they had really didn't understand all the details and where these liens were before they made the offer. So, again, you try to do all your work up front if possible.
Yeah.
And then, so in addition to trying, to do things where you can deter lawsuits, we also talk about, things that'll motivate creditors to settle. So if a lawsuit does occur and it's moving forward and we're trying to just minimize the expense or the loss, you want to make sure that we've done things in advance, maybe how the property's owned, how your business is owned, what legal entities are in there, to make sure that the creditors or the people who are trying to sue you are motivated, because they can see it'll be very difficult and very expensive and very time-consuming to come after this wealth. Mm-hmm. And as a result, typically they're just motivated to settle in terms that are more favorable to you.
Yeah.
So those are the two categories, I guess. Like I said, discouraging and deter, and then the second is motivation to settle. So I guess we could get into maybe some of the steps that we normally take with clients.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. So asset protection planning really shouldn't be your first line of defense and safeguarding. What we're really trying to do up front is look at ways where we can maybe work with your property and casualty agency, work with your business insurance carrier to see if there's some low-cost ways to push the defense onto the insurance companies by buying insurance. So, for example, a personal umbrella policy. I have one. I have my own homeowners, my auto. You probably have the same thing. And then I also have an umbrella policy for $2 million, just so that if there was something that was to happen, somebody slips and falls in my driveway, somebody falls at my office, or there's something that occurs that creates liability at my office, what happens is the people who might go after you to get compensation for that, they're going to see that you have an umbrella policy, and they're going to first go there. And just as we talked about in the other example where the bank has more capital and more people to fight you, if we can push some of this responsibility off to an insurance company that fights for a living, on these kind of matters, it's a very low-cost, high-benefit way, to protect you initially.
Yeah.
And then you could also do the same thing for your business. So I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business owner myself. When we work with our insurance agents, we get high liability insurance so that we can make sure that, if something happens through the business, I'm covered also. So as it relates to my clients, what we typically do is when we assemble these teams, we have, like I said, attorneys, CPAs, trust officers that collaborate for each client. We also have what we call a high net worth or high-end property and casualty agent, because oftentimes clients are very complicated. They might have homes, properties, or businesses, autos in different states. Many, like the traditional state farms, the traditional local insurance companies and agents, typically don't work across state lines. So what you're really looking for is a professional that can really evaluate the whole picture, look at all your liability on each different list of your assets, and really do a comprehensive plan to minimize your risk. Mm-hmm. So that's really the first step, and that's pretty basic, is really just getting involved with a high net worth property and casualty agent who can get on your team, collaborate with us so that we're, at the very least, limiting your liability up front.
All right, so that's the first step. Where do we go from there?
So the next step is, once you've done that, there's really some tips that we go through with our clients, or a checklist that we walk through for asset protection planning. And first and foremost, we talk about the fact that asset protection is not about hiding wealth, and it should be very transparent. And this is usually when we're talking to somebody, we get a little feedback from them, because like I said earlier, when you read about protecting assets, or when you get a lot of solicitations from people who are looking to help you with this, oftentimes they talk about offshore or moving assets or doing things so that people can't find assets, or making sure that it's private. But the reality is, with a lot of these techniques, you want them to be transparent, so creditors or anyone who's really coming after you will see what you've done and understand that it's going to be very difficult for them to try and go after your assets if that's what their goal is.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
And I'll just give you a quick example. So we're in the Midwest like you, Eric, and we have I have a number of farming clients, and recently working with a family that has a fair amount of farmland that has we've basically worked with the attorney to create very complicated ownership, not necessarily to protect the assets, but for estate planning, because you've got multiple generations looking to preserve and protect the farmland, passing it to the next generation. And so one of the G3 or the third generation kids is getting married. And so there was the conversation we had with the person getting married as well as their fiance about a prenuptial. And prenuptial agreements, are complicated, but yet, and there's kind of a connotation where, it's something that the super wealthy do, or that's not something that I need to focus on. But the reality is, when you're trying to protect something like this farmland, passing down 2, 3, 4 generations and keeping it in the family, it's just important that you have a fully transparent an agreement like that up front, so that if something ever happened, God forbid, in this marriage, that the property being transferred, the farm being transferred down to the next generation and further, won't be impacted negatively.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's people have a bad taste in their mouth about prenups. Oh, you're already saying that the marriage is going to fail, and so on and so forth. There's all sorts of verbiage around that. But honestly, if you're just wise, period, it's not about the husband or the wife or the fiance in this case. It's about the entire family, and it's about a legacy that needs to be preserved no matter what happens. And God bless you. You found a great woman or you found a great husband, and we wish you the best, but we're still going to protect the entire family. That this person was your choice, but our choice is to protect the ongoing generations.
Exactly. And what I found in working with the attorney, and I had a great attorney sit in a meeting with myself and then this couple that's getting married, is that the law requires, and each state is different, and I'm not an attorney and I'm not practicing law, but what I understood and what he communicated very well was that transparency is critical for these agreements, meaning that if at some point down the road something does happen with the marriage where there is a divorce, you have to really document that this fiance who was not, who was joining the family, really was fully disclosed what was going on, why, and actually that then he or she also gets his or her own representation. And you really want to document that you offered that. So my point is, law requires that you have a very, very transparent agreement and a fully open and discussion with it. So that's probably one of the reasons why it's such a difficult topic too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But also, that gets to things you got to watch out for. And I do run across this periodically where a client will come to me and say, I have an example, like 3 years ago, I had a client selling a practice, and he had, through his association out in California, they had connected with an attorney and then also a CPA who, actually we thought he was a CPA, but they were recommending a super aggressive private strategy of moving the business offshore, selling offshore. The guy was claiming, well, Apple does this all the time. Big companies do this all the time, so that's what we're doing. And the point is, it wasn't a strategy that could be done, and it was definitely illegal. So it's just something to watch out for. Anytime people are saying that they can, avoid taxes, keep it private, move it offshore, you trust, but super be careful and verify.
Yeah, and when somebody says, well, Apple's doing it, or well, Microsoft does it, that's not a justification for why you should do it. When they start saying stuff like that, that's when you kind of wonder, okay, so. Yeah,
and he was saying, hey, but the music legend Bono does it. We're like, yeah, well, that doesn't mean we can do it, I mean, it was really kind of funny if it wasn't so scary.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other part, too, is, if there's ever a bankruptcy, for example, or somehow you're not filing bankruptcy, but somehow you're connected into it, the law is very specific about, things you can and can't do. And, oftentimes when we talk about one or two different things, multidimensional planning. We could do a lot of estate planning, like we talked about with the farmland, or I've done situations where the client is buying a condo for a son or daughter, and as a result of putting it in a limited liability corp, and there's some asset protection there, but the purpose is estate planning. So when you're in front of a judge, whether it's divorce or bankruptcy or somebody suing you, oftentimes if it's for estate planning that has a secondary benefit of asset protection, there's a purpose and it's accepted, as opposed to just doing something purely for hiding. So it's just a stronger case. That's all. Mm-hmm. The other kind of main concept we talk about is, you need to do it well before you need to have it in place. So, for example, I have another client where they're looking to sell a business, and they're targeting probably 4 to 5 years down the road. And one of the strategies we're implementing is, transitioning that business over the next 2 or 3 years down to Florida, which is a low no income tax state. There's also states like Nevada, Wyoming, and others. But in this case, there's a business purpose. There's also a personal reason for moving it to Florida. And so if we can establish that we've moved it down to Florida, when the sale does occur, you're not fighting with the state the state regulators or the state tax collectors about, why they should collect the tax versus paying nothing in Florida. And the point is, you don't want to be considered doing anything fraudulent. You want to do things well in advance with a real business purpose, and you need to document, all the way down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, there's I hesitate and I never want to mention companies, but there's one in the news right now where it relates to the opioid crisis we're having in the country. And there's a company in particular that was alleged to be selling more of these opioids than they should have. And anyway, the state regulators have really gone hard against them, and as a result, the company's filing bankruptcy. But in the news, the claim by the regulators is that the family has moved billions of dollars out of the company to all kinds of different personal accounts. And I'm not making a claim that happened. I'm just saying I'm reading the paper, and this is an example of somebody who likely, if it's true, waited too long. Or, when you do things in anticipation of bankruptcy, of, criminal claims and things like that, that's definitely not a good thing.
Yeah, that's a no-no.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, I'll just say also that, when we do asset protection planning, we focus on being very flexible. I don't want to lock a client into something that's irrevocable and can't be changed. We also focus on, doing multiple strategies. Like I said, doing things for estate planning that also might have the benefit of protecting assets, for the family. The other part of it is we always want to make sure that it's cost effective. A lot of these strategies that people talk about or that we read about are very expensive, and you always need to weigh the cost benefit. What would work for some families, might work for Warren Buffett, but doesn't necessarily make financial sense to, one of my clients. So cost benefit is always a big thing. So we look at multiple strategies, we look at specific needs, we measure the cost and benefit, and we make sure that the client knows what they're getting into and whether there's long-term financial commitments for these for these strategies. And then the other part of it is that we also want to make sure that we're working with their team. If they have any weaknesses in their teams, we help them get it. And we also want to regularly review the strategies, because strategies in particular with asset protection change a lot. Mm-hmm. Laws change, tax laws change, but also this is a sector or a part of the industry where people are continually working to come up with new ideas, and so we're always what we call stress testing these ideas to see if they are going to work under all circumstances or what the cost benefit will be for our clients. So we usually do a stress test for our clients at least once a year as it relates to their comprehensive plan. But as it relates to asset protection in particular, we always want to make sure we're documenting as the laws change, because they change quickly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of what you do. We've talked about it in a lot of podcasts before this, is that you really help to make sure that the entire team is organized, so that when those changes do come through, you're working with that tax professional, you're working with the attorneys, and getting everything updated, being able to stress test everything because you're working as an entire team. So, and I know that your clients appreciate it. Let me ask you this: when you're talking with this team, how easy is it for them to pivot when you do these stress tests to say, "Yep, we need to make some changes"?
Well, we make sure that all the advisors working and collaborating for each client are fully up to date and involved in each of the meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about strategies and maybe new strategies that are available, reviewing existing plans that we have in place, oftentimes we've been talking about it as an ongoing process. So
yeah,
pivoting is relatively easy because we're typically always talking about the pros and cons, the cost and benefit, and we're working and making these decisions as a team. Obviously, the client ultimately makes the decision, but as a group, we're recommending and each giving our opinion, thoughts on the pros and cons.
All right. And so if somebody's listening to this podcast right now, Tim, they're like, okay, I don't know if my advisor does that. I don't think they work with my entire team. I don't even think they've met my attorney. If they want to reach out to you, number one, how do they get a hold of you? And then number two, what are the first steps?
Excellent. So we find that in the super high net worth, the major thing they do different is that they have a process where they stress test their plans, including their asset protection plan, on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. That's just something that other clients we run across or prospects we run across don't. So if you're looking to stress test your plans, whether it's the asset protection or all the variables of your plan, you could reach out to me at tscannell@hightoweradvisors.com. You can call me at 219-246-5370, or just check out our website, Hightower Great Lakes, and you can find a number of resources there.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. This was a great podcast. And thank you all for listening to the WealthStream Podcast with Tim Scannell. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Tim comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Hightower Great Lakes, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the WealthStream Podcast. We hope you gained some valuable insight that you can apply to your life and share with others. Please don't forget to subscribe below to be notified when new episodes become available. And don't forget to live greater. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Hightower Great Lakes. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Hightower Great Lakes is a group of investment professionals registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC, and with Hightower Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC.